Welcome to a video about the first game of the new season. In this game I played for my Belgian club Eupen and we played against the team of Mechelen in the Belgian League. So I played against a young Dutch FIDE-master, Luuk Baselmans, quite a decent player, and I saw that he mainly played other openings than the one that he was playing in the game, and so I was a bit surprised by what he did. And I decided not to go for my standard repertoire with knight to c3, but to play a somewhat tricky sideline of the Catalan. So I played g3. And after the normal moves of the Catalan, he chose to play the system with d takes c, which is the main line. And here, mainstream theory goes queen c2. And then after a6, basically white can either go a4 or can take here on c4, and there's a lot of theory there. Instead, I decided to play a line which I know that this line was played by Magnus Carlsen last year against Anish Giri. Namely, this line was knight to a3. The idea is quite clear. If white takes on c4, white has a clear advantage. So black is basically forced to take the knight. And now white has this slightly awkward pawn structure and is a pawn down, but in return, white is much better developed, has these two bishops and potentially a nice b line. This position, however, is quite concrete. So the move that was played in the game Carlsen-Giri was the move bishop to d7, and Carlsen won a very, very nice game there, but objectively I think the position is roughly equal. However, my opponent played a move which is probably slightly inferior, the move knight to c6, which at least gives white a bit easier play. So now this bishop on c8 has some problems in terms of developing later on and cannot no longer find a natural square on c6. I went for bishop b2, intending maybe something like rook c1. And probably here he should have played the move knight to d5 and then give up the pawn after rook c1. And I think, still the position is probably, if anything, just very slightly better for white. Instead, he went for the most ambitious move in the position, namely the move rook to b8. The goal is simple, to play b5. If you go b5 here, obviously you run into these kind of shenanigans, so you don't want to do that. So that's why you're prepared with rook b8, now intending to go b5 on the next move. However, this gives me the time to actually sacrifice this d4 pawn, namely playing knight to d2, giving up the d4 pawn, but now of course he can't go b5, so he basically is forced to either take the pawn immediately or maybe to take the pawn after first exchanging like this. Which I think is also viable. Now the bishop is slightly worse than it was on b2, so I think it's definitely an option you could have considered. However, instead he decided to immediately take the pawn, which is also fine, I guess. And now, after takes and knight c6, we have a quite interesting position where I have a clear advantage in terms of development. These two bishops are extremely strong. However, I'm a pawn down and I have this double pawns on the a file. Probably here I should have played a bit more carefully. So here I probably should have played a4, which kind of is a prophylactic move preventing queen e7 due to bishop a3. And in the Catalan it's quite often the case that even if black manages to exchange a pair of queens here, the pressure is still there, so it's very difficult for black to develop. You can't go bishop d7 because of bishop f6, and you can't go b5, so it's kind of awkward. And if you go like knight e7, this is very slow, so at some point I can even go bishop e5, maybe even here, and it's already very awkward with the position of these pieces. So probably here I missed the chance to get a substantial advantage with the move a4. I instead went for a move that was kind of uninspired, the move queen to b3. Looks logical, plans this rook d1, rook c1, but the problem is that black now has a very nice way of regrouping, and that's also what he did in the game. He played bishop d7, rook d1, and now this queen e7. And now the point is, as I didn't play a4, he doesn't have to worry about bishop a3 at this point in time. And I think here I'm no longer better. Black has kind of managed to develop at least the bishop to the square d7. Maybe later on it will go to e8. and black is still a pawn up. So objectively, it's probably now on me to really show that I have enough compensation for the pawn. I went for the move a4, obviously intending bishop a3, and also maybe preventing later b5. But now after rook fd8, it's suddenly not so easy to continue for white anymore. Probably I should just go rook ac1, and then to just keep the game afloat. But yeah, in the game I wasn't too sure about the position, and I mean objectively it's definitely also not better for white. So I decided I go for this move bishop to a3, which at least kicks the queen away, but actually this is quite a nice square for the queen. Now this bishop is really misplaced. The bishop was much better on b2, where it had some ideas regarding the knight on f6. And yeah, here I realized I completely misplayed this phase of the game, and I decided, okay, I will go back to b2 and see what's going to happen. I was expecting him to either go queen e7 back, and then I would have probably went for something like rook ac1. Or, and this was what I was really afraid of in the game, that he would go for this move e5. Yeah, which on the one hand protects the knight on f6, and on the other hand now opens up the bishop to go to greener pastures somewhere along this diagonal. And yeah, this position is now really quite unpleasant for white. And yeah, during the game I was not sure if there's any way of keeping the balance, and also the computer agrees that black is already better here. So when I came back to the board and I was expecting this move e5 or queen e7, I was very, very pleasantly surprised that my opponent made a huge blunder here, namely the move b7 to b6, with the idea to prepare the move e5 later on. But yeah, this is just way too slow, in particular since I cannot just take on f6. And after gf6 he completely missed my follow-up, so he thought I would go for queen to c3. But I have this very strong move queen to f3, double attacking this pawn on f6 and threatening rook takes d7, followed by queen takes c6. So after queen f3 the tide has turned, and I'm just clearly better here. He basically now has a very unpleasant choice. So one option that he has is to kind of give me this pawn on f6. Let's say he plays something like knight e7, queen f6, and maybe even try to grab this pawn. But then I thought, okay, I take, and I go for something like knight e5. And this is extremely unpleasant for black. Yes, he is a pawn up, but I mean, I'm threatening stuff like that, which is kind of almost mating. I'm also threatening stuff like rook c1, rook c4, rook g4, which looks quite strong. I might also come with h4, h5, h6. And it's very, very difficult for my opponent to get rid of the queens here. And as long as the queens are on the board, white is just yeah, very clearly better. So even though I'm a pawn down, I was very, very happy to go for that position. So instead he basically chose the other option, namely to play the move f6 to f5, which now allows me to take on d7. Quite clearly he was concerned about his king, but the resulting position after f5 is also not particularly nice. So I think probably he should have played knight e7 in hindsight. Okay, so now, as I said, I just took on d7, and he took back. So there were some funny lines here, which probably didn't change much in terms of the evaluation. So for instance, he could have started with this move, with the idea that if I take on d8, he has this intermezzo on f3, but it doesn't really change anything in terms of the evaluation. I would take on d4, and it's still roughly the same position. So instead he went for queen takes d7, and now I took on c6. And we get an interesting position where we have this 2 versus 3 on the queen side, and I have 2 pieces for a rook. My opponent now decided to take on c6 himself. Maybe it's a bit more accurate to go for a6 immediately, but in any case he should definitely now go for this a6 b5 to try to get rid of as many pawns as possible quite early on in the endgame. So in terms of strategy in this endgame, white is better definitely, but I thought it would not be so easy to win it. The main problem I have is if all pawns on the queen side disappear, it could be a draw. If black manages to exchange one pair of rooks, it could even become very, very unpleasant for me. So these are the two things which I have to avoid. So trading too many pawns on the queen side, and in particular to exchange one pair of rooks, because if you have more pieces in general, then what you should do is you should keep more pieces on the board. This is the same story for instance, for 3 minor pieces against the queen. 3 minor pieces typically better in the middle game, queen typically better in the end game. And here it's the same. The 2 minor pieces are typically better than the rook if there is still some other rook on the board, but if it's just one rook against 2 minor pieces, this is advantageous for black. Okay, as I said, he should have now pushed for a6, b5, but he played the move rook to d4 instead. And now after rook c1, rook d8, he threatens to exchange one pair of rooks, which would swing the evaluation of the position. But I can just avoid it by going king to g2. And yeah, now it's not so easy for him to make any progress. I will basically put my rook to c2, and then my position is kind of stable. So there's no way of kicking away this bishop, there's no way of kicking away this knight. So all that black can potentially hope for is to get some counterplay on the first rank, but it's also not so easy to organize. So he went for this king g7, and now rook to d1. And yeah, now basically the dust has settled, and I have to find a good plan. And yeah, the plan I had in mind was to at some point go a5, but I want to be very stable before I do that. And so what I did was to first put my bishop on f3, and then my knight on c2. Yeah, and now he defended by playing c5, and I went for this move a4, a5. And here I thought, yeah, I'm doing quite well, but I thought it's kind of mandatory for him to take on a5. And then I would probably play something like knight c4, and at some point consolidate my position, little by little take these pawns, and yeah, hopefully at some point just win the game. And it was kind of important for me to keep this pawn on, because it's very, very difficult to get any counterplay against this pawn for black. So at some point this is the guy who is there to promote. The computer gives a line which we both completely missed during the game and also in the analysis, namely the move c5 to c4. Once you see the move, you realize it's a very, very strong move. But if you don't know that it exists, it's very, very hard to spot, I think. What is the point of c4? Well, the point is I can't take with the rook because the knight is hanging. And if I don't take, of course, he's going to go b5 next, or maybe even c3 next, and then the pawns suddenly run. So the most natural move is to take with the knight, or maybe to exchange a pair of pawns first, and to then take with the knight. And in either case, black can just go rook to c8. And now you have this very, very unpleasant pin. And yeah, this is definitely no longer as easy anymore, because the only way for me to release this pin is to at some point remove the knight. So let me give you one sample line. Let's say a3, b5, and now knight to e3. Takes, rook a2, knight d4, takes. And we land in this endgame where, I mean, I guess white still has some winning chances, but I would guess that with optimal play it's probably a draw. Because of the very limited material on the king side. So in this position, this move c4, which would have led to a quite forced line, the one I showed you, would definitely have been a good way for him to try to draw the game. It would not have been guaranteed for sure, but I mean, it's definitely way, way, way better than what he did in the game. Namely to play this move rook to b8. Yeah, so I was again mainly thinking about ba, which is bad, and this move c4 would have really given him a chance to survive. Okay, rook b8, and now, yeah, now again I go for a6, and here in principle he would have had a similar idea again, namely this move c4, which yeah we didn't spot before, and again didn't spot here with similar conclusions. But instead he went for the move rook to c8. Yeah, and now the game is basically over because I can just put my bishop on b7 and now bring my knight to b6. So he played rook c7, knight to c4. I'm threatening to take this pawn to just then run through. So he went rook b1, protecting the pawn. But now I can grab this pawn from the other side, namely via c8 and a7, and there is nothing he can do about it. So he played on for a few moves, but clearly when the a7 pawn is gone, the game is gone as well. So after this move, takes, knight b5, my opponent resigned. So I will now promote, and he will have to give up the rook for the pawn, and then I have just 2 minor pieces left, which is definitely enough to win the game. Well, I think this opening phase was quite interesting. Giving up this pawn for the 2 strong bishops. It's a type of position which I have not really played that much. I think my opponent also not. So both of us played this phase not very accurately. And then I think the big turning point was definitely when he played this move b6, allowing me to get to this endgame, which then was quite unpleasant for him. He had some chances with his c4 later on, but this was very, very hard to spot, I would say. I also didn't see it at all. And yeah, otherwise the endgame was, unless he finds something extraordinary, the endgame was definitely much easier to play and close to winning for white. So yeah, that was the first game of the new season in Belgium. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time.